"That bitch is trying to kill your mom," the little street kid shrieked about the nurse taking care of the millionaire's mother. When they open the hospital closet, they discover something shocking. Comment: giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream echoed through the sterile hallways of the private hospital like a knife slicing through the afternoon silence. The 30-year-old widowed millionaire abruptly stopped walking towards the elevator, his elegant hands nearly dropping the bouquet of white roses he was carrying for his mother, who was staying on the 10th floor. His blue eyes, usually focused on analyzing stock market charts and investment reports, now desperately searched for the source of that disturbing sound. There, between the leather chairs of the luxurious lobby, a child who looked no more than 4 years old struggled in the arms of a cleaning lady. Her appearance was devastating. Disheveled hair, dirty clothes that looked like they had been found in the trash, and a thin face that revealed weeks of malnutrition. But it was her eyes that were most striking, large, dark, and filled with a pain that no child should know. "She's killing Grandma! She's killing Grandma!" the girl repeated, screaming, pointing frantically to the corridor that led to the private rooms. Her hoarse and desperate voice made those in the lobby recoil in discomfort, whispering to each other about the inappropriateness of allowing street children in that select environment. The businessman hesitated for a moment, his natural instinct to avoid other people's problems battling against something he couldn't quite identify. For years, he had built his millions of dollars keeping an emotional distance from anything that could shake his focus on business. After losing his wife in an accident 5 years ago, he had isolated himself even further, finding security only in the cold numbers of his financial reports and the controlled routine of his daily visits to his mother. But something in that child's voice made him stop. Maybe it was the genuine despair he recognized in himself, or the way she mentioned Grandma, a term his own mother insisted he use, even at 30 years old. He approached slowly, watching as the girl continued to struggle. Her small fists clenched as she tried to free herself from the cleaning lady's arms. "Please, sir, don't bother yourself," said the cleaning woman, clearly embarrassed. "She showed up here a few weeks ago and we can't get rid of her. She always makes up these crazy stories. Security has been called several times, but she always finds a way to come back." "What kind of stories?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. His characteristic of absolute control over all situations was being challenged by a child who seemed to have completely lost her mind. The girl stopped struggling the exact moment she heard his voice. Her eyes fixed on his with a disturbing intensity, as if she were evaluating whether she could trust him. After a moment that seemed eternal, she murmured in a trembling voice, "The lady in white is putting bad things in Grandma's IV drip. She does it when no one is looking, but I saw it, I saw everything." "Which lady in white?" he asked, feeling an inexplicable chill run down his spine. His mother had been hospitalized for 6 months, and during all that time, only one nurse had been responsible for her special care. A middle-aged woman with an angelic appearance who everyone praised for her exceptional dedication. "The one who takes care of Grandma in the big room upstairs," the girl replied, pointing again to the upper floor. "She has blonde hair and always smiles, but her smile is fake. She messes with things when she thinks no one is watching." The businessman felt his controlled world begin to tremble. For months, he had blindly trusted the medical team, especially that nurse who seemed so devoted to caring for his mother. His internal conflict between the need to control everything and the impossibility of protecting the only person he really loved tormented him daily. But he had always found comfort in the certainty that she was receiving the best care his money could buy. "How do you know about my mother's room?" he asked, crouching down to get to the child's height. "How do you know these details?" The girl looked around nervously before whispering, "I live here." Nobody sees me, but I see everything. I know when she gives the right medicines and when she gives the others, the ones that make Grandma weaker." The cleaning lady shook her head in disapproval. "Sir, please don't pay attention to her. She's just a traumatized child who lost her mother and now invents fantasies. The doctors have already explained that this is normal." But the millionaire couldn't take his eyes off that small, fragile figure. Something in her eyes, a disturbing lucidity mixed with a deep sadness, prevented him from simply ignoring her words. For years, he had learned to read people through his investments and businesses, developing a sharp instinct to detect lies and manipulations. And that child, despite all her apparent vulnerability, exuded a raw sincerity that disconcerted him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "I don't have a name anymore," she replied, lowering her eyes. "Mom used to call me Birdie, but she's gone now, and I'm just the girl nobody wants." The businessman's heart clenched in a way it hadn't felt in years. His own guilt for having distanced himself from his mother for so long to build his financial empire mingled with an unexpected compassion for that abandoned child. He who always avoided emotional complications, who had built high walls around his feelings since the loss of his wife, suddenly found himself connected with the suffering of that little lost soul. "Listen," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "If you really saw something strange, I need you to tell me everything, but first you need to eat something and get cleaned up. Can you do that for me?" The girl nodded vigorously, and for the first time, a small glimmer of hope shone in her dark eyes. 3 hours later, in the penthouse cafe of the hospital, the millionaire watched the girl devour a sandwich as if she hadn't eaten in days. After a bath and clean clothes that he had sent for, she looked like a completely different child, still fragile, but with a dignity that had previously been hidden beneath the layers of dirt and despair. Her clean hair revealed brown streaks that shone under the soft light of the restaurant. "Now tell me everything," he said, adjusting his tie as he leaned forward. His obsessive need to control every situation was in direct conflict with the emotional chaos that this child had brought into his meticulously organized life. The girl chewed slowly before responding, her eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings as if she still couldn't believe she was there. "I sleep in the empty rooms. There's one on the 3rd floor that nobody uses at night. From there I can see the hallway where Grandma's room is." "How long have you been here?" he asked, feeling a knot grow in his stomach as he realized that a child had been living like a ghost in the same hospital where he visited his mother daily. "Since Mom left," she replied simply. "She was on the same floor as Grandma, in the room next door. I used to hide under her bed when the doctors came. One night the lady in white came and gave Mom a different medicine. The next day she didn't wake up anymore." The businessman felt the blood freeze in his veins. His fortune, built through careful investments and detailed risk analysis, had taught him to detect patterns, and what the girl described was a pattern too disturbing to ignore. "Are you sure it was the same nurse?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "She has a small mark on her neck like a moon," the child replied, tracing a crescent shape on her own neck, "and she always wears a gold ring with a red stone. I learned to recognize people by the small details, because when you're invisible, you need to pay attention to everything." The millionaire knew exactly what birthmark and what ring she was talking about. The head nurse responsible for his mother's care wore both. For months, he had placed complete trust in that woman who seemed so dedicated, who worked extra shifts without complaining, and who always reassured him with optimistic reports about his mother's condition. "Show me where you hide," he said abruptly, getting up from the table. "I need to see with my own eyes." The girl guided him through the corridors of the hospital with the agility of someone who knew every corner, every hiding place. They climbed the service stairs, avoiding the main elevators where they could be seen. On the 3rd floor, she led him to an apparently abandoned equipment room, where some old stretchers were stacked in a corner. "This is where I see everything," she whispered, pointing to a small observation window that overlooked the 10th floor hallway. At night, when the lights are dimmer, I can see when she goes into Grandma's room. Through the window, he could perfectly see the hallway where his mother's room was. The location was too strategic to be a coincidence. That child had found the perfect vantage point, and for weeks she had been the only witness to something that apparently no one else had noticed. "She always comes after 11 at night," the girl continued, huddling between the stretchers as if the simple act of talking about it frightened her. "She brings a small bag and messes with the wires that connect to Grandma's arm. Then she stands there, watching, as if she's waiting for something to happen." The businessman felt a fury grow in his chest, an emotion he had learned to suppress during years of cold negotiations and decisions based purely on financial logic. His mother, the only person who had remained by his side after the loss of his wife, was potentially being poisoned by someone he completely trusted. "Why didn't anyone believe you when you told them this?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. A dirty and apparently abandoned child had no credibility against a respected nurse in an elite hospital. "I tried to tell the other nurses, but they said I was crazy," she replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "They said I was making up stories because I was sad about Mom. A doctor even said I needed psychological help." At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The girl immediately cowered even further, pulling the businessman behind the stacked stretchers. Through the gap between the equipment, they saw the head nurse walking purposefully towards the elevators, carrying a small bag exactly as the child had described. "It's her," whispered the girl, her whole body trembling. "She's going to do it again." The millionaire watched the woman, who for months he had considered a guardian angel for his mother. Now, seeing her through the eyes of that traumatized child, every gesture seemed laden with a sinister quality he had never noticed. The way she constantly checked her surroundings, how her eyes seemed to calculate something beyond normal medical care. "We need proof," he murmured, more to himself than to the girl. His business mind was racing, calculating risks and strategies as he did when analyzing high-value investments. "We can't just accuse without concrete evidence." "I tried to take pictures with a cell phone I found," the girl said timidly, "but it stopped working, and I didn't know how to fix it." The innocence of that confession hit him like a punch. A 4-year-old child had tried alone to gather evidence of a crime that not even the responsible adults had noticed. Her courage was both inspiring and devastating. "From today, you're not going to be alone in this anymore," he said, placing his hand on her small shoulder. "We're going to find out the truth together, but I need you to promise me one thing. Don't do anything alone anymore." "It's too dangerous." The girl nodded vigorously, and for the first time since he had found her, he saw something beyond fear in her eyes. There was hope, trust, and a connection he hadn't felt in years. Despite all his resistance to emotional bonds, something in that child was awakening paternal feelings he didn't even know he possessed. But as they planned their next action, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from the entrance of the equipment room. The head nurse had returned silently, and her cold eyes now knew exactly who was asking inconvenient questions about her nighttime activities. The next morning, the millionaire arrived at the hospital with a steely determination he hadn't felt in years. He had spent the night awake, analyzing every visit he had made to his mother in recent months, every conversation with the head nurse, every detail that now took on a sinister meaning in the light of the girl's revelations. His investments in funds and stocks always required meticulous analysis of patterns, and now he was applying the same methodology to a situation that could cost his mother's life. The child was waiting for him in the lobby, wearing the new clothes he had provided. She looked less like a haunted ghost and more like a determined little girl, but her eyes still carried that premature wisdom that deeply disturbed him. During the night, he had made a decision that would change both their lives. No matter what they discovered, he would not allow her to return to living on the streets. "Today, we're going to do things differently," he said, crouching down to get to her height. "I'm going to take you to meet my mother officially. I want to see how the nurse reacts when she realizes you're not an invisible child anymore." Going up to the 10th floor, he noticed how the girl gradually transformed. Her steps became more cautious, her shoulders hunched slightly, and she began to constantly look over her shoulders. Fear was etched into every fiber of her being, the result of weeks living like a fugitive in what should have been her sanctuary. His mother's room was a luxurious haven overlooking the city, furnished with all the comforts that his millions of dollars could provide. His mother, a 70-year-old lady with silver hair, was propped up in bed, looking more fragile than he remembered from his last visit. Her eyes, once bright and sharp, seemed clouded and distant. "Mom, I brought a new friend to meet you," he said, carefully observing her reactions. Birdie remained glued to his leg, watching everything with microscopic attention. The lady smiled weakly, extending a trembling hand. "What a lovely child. What's your name, dear?" I don't have a name," Birdie whispered, but her eyes were fixed on the medical equipment around the bed, cataloguing every detail with disturbing precision. At that moment, the door opened and the head nurse entered with her usual professional smile. Her eyes landed on Birdie, and for a fraction of a second, the millionaire caught something that made him freeze. Recognition, and something that looked a lot like restrained anger. "Good morning, sir," she said in a honeyed voice. "I see you brought a special visitor today, but I'm afraid such young children can disturb your mother's rest." "She's well behaved," he replied, watching as the nurse moved around the room. Every gesture he had previously considered careful now seemed calculated, predatory. Birdie squeezed his hand tighter, whispering almost imperceptibly, "She's nervous. Look how her hands are shaking." It was true. The nurse's hands, always so steady and confident, trembled slightly as she checked the equipment. Her eyes also avoided direct contact with the child, as if she represented a threat that needed to be carefully managed. "Perhaps it's best if the visit is brief today," the nurse continued, unnecessarily adjusting the tubes connected to the patient's arm. "Your mother had a restless night. She needed extra medication to sleep." The businessman felt alarms going off in his mind. For months, the nurse always encouraged him to stay longer, always reported that his mother had peaceful nights. The sudden change in behavior could not be a coincidence. "What kind of medication?" he asked, trying to sound casual while observing every micro-expression on the woman's face. "Just a mild sedative prescribed by the doctor," she replied quickly, but her eyes darted away again. "Nothing to worry about." Birdie let go of his hand and walked to the window, seemingly interested in the city view. But he realized that she was positioned in a way that she could observe both the nurse and the medical equipment without looking suspicious. Her strategic intelligence was impressive for someone so young. "Nurse," Birdie said suddenly, her voice small but clear, "why is the medicine in the little tube a different color today?" The silence that followed was tense. The nurse froze for a moment before slowly turning to the girl. "What little tube, dear?" "That one." The child pointed innocently to the IV drip. "Last night it was clear, but today it has a very faint yellowish color." The millionaire looked where she was pointing and indeed noticed a slight difference in the coloration of the liquid. His experience in detecting irregularities in financial reports had trained him to notice minimal discrepancies, and now that skill applied to a much more personal situation. "Children have very active imaginations," the nurse said with a forced laugh. "It's just the morning light creating illusions. The medication is exactly the same as always." But her voice had changed its tone, becoming higher, more defensive. The businessman knew this type of reaction from his negotiations. It was the sound of someone being cornered and desperately trying to maintain control of the situation. "Maybe I should talk to the attending physician," he said calmly. I'd like to review all the medications my mother is receiving. As a businessman, I prefer to have all the details documented." The nurse hesitated, her eyes darting quickly between him, the child, and the patient. "Of course, but the doctor only arrives at 2 in the afternoon. Maybe it's best if you come back at that time." "That's no problem. We can wait," he replied, sitting comfortably in the armchair next to the bed. "I have free time today." The tension in the room became palpable. The nurse clearly wanted them to leave, but she couldn't force the situation without appearing suspicious. Birdie returned to his side, whispering softly, "She wants to change the medicine, but she can't do it with us here." For the next 2 hours, they remained in the room. The nurse tried several times to find excuses for them to leave, but he firmly held his position. He watched as she became increasingly agitated, checking the clock constantly and making hushed calls from the hallway. When the doctor finally arrived, the millionaire requested a complete review of all the medications. To his surprise, the doctor seemed genuinely confused when reviewing the IV drip. "Nurse, what medication is this?" he asked, frowning. "It's not on the prescription I left." The nurse's face paled visibly. "I thought you had authorized a change yesterday." "I didn't authorize any change," the doctor replied, his voice growing more serious. "And this medication shouldn't be being administered to this patient. It can cause dangerous interactions with the other medicines." The businessman's world stopped for a moment. Everything Birdie had tried to say, all the suspicions he had tried to rationalize, were confirmed before his eyes. His mother was really being systematically poisoned, and he had been too blind to notice. The nurse began to stammer confused explanations, but the doctor was already disconnecting the drip and calling other professionals. The controlled chaos that followed confirmed all the millionaire's worst fears. While the doctors worked to reverse the effects of the incorrect medication, he looked at the girl who had saved his mother's life. She was standing by the window, watching everything with that disturbing maturity, as if she knew that this was just the tip of a much larger and more dangerous iceberg. 3 weeks after the discovery of the incorrect medication, the millionaire's carefully constructed world was crumbling. The head nurse had been temporarily suspended, but not fired. The hospital claimed the need for an internal investigation before taking drastic measures. Meanwhile, his mother showed signs of gradual improvement, but the businessman couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was being covered up. Birdie now lived officially under his temporary care, the result of a legal battle that had consumed a significant portion of his financial resources. She had adapted surprisingly well to the luxurious apartment, but still maintained survival habits that broke his heart, such as hiding food under her bed and always sleeping with her back to the wall. "There are more people involved," she said one morning, while they were having breakfast on the terrace overlooking the city. Her eyes, now bright with good food and proper medical care, maintained that sharp perception that constantly impressed him. The lady in white wasn't alone. I saw her talking to other people. "What other people?" he asked, interrupting his reading of reports on his investments in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. In recent days, he had begun to liquidate some of his investments, preparing for a legal war that he sensed was necessary. "A man in a lab coat who comes from time to time, and an older lady who doesn't wear a uniform but always carries a big briefcase," Birdie replied, nibbling on a piece of toast as if she still couldn't believe she could eat as much as she wanted. "They meet in the room where they keep the medicines. I could hear them sometimes." The millionaire felt a chill. During his daily visits to the hospital, he had noticed the man she described, a doctor who was not part of his mother's regular team, but who occasionally appeared in the corridors. As for the lady with the briefcase, a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. That same day, he received a call that confirmed his worst fears. It was from his stepmother, his late father's second wife, a woman he had always considered greedy but harmless. "Dear stepson," she said with that sweet voice that always hid poison, "I need to talk to you about your mother. I heard she's had some health problems recently." "What kind of talk?" he asked, feeling the tension grow in his chest. For years he had kept his distance from his stepmother, paying her a generous allowance just to avoid family conflicts. Well, as you know, your father left me with power of attorney for family medical matters in extreme cases. I'm worried about the excessive costs of this private hospital. Maybe it's time to consider more economical options. His blood ran cold. The power of attorney was real. A document his father had signed years ago when he still trusted his second wife. At the time, it seemed like just a legal formality, but now it represented a direct threat to his mother's well-being. "My mother is receiving the best possible care," he said, struggling to keep his voice controlled. "And I can pay for it indefinitely." "Ah, but even the most successful businessman can face financial difficulties," she replied with a malicious tone. "And I heard you've been making some risky investments recently. Trouble with the stock market, perhaps." The call ended with a veiled but clear threat. If he did not cooperate, she would use the power of attorney to transfer his mother to a public hospital, where the care would be infinitely worse. The businessman realized he was being blackmailed, but he still didn't fully understand the extent of the conspiracy. It was Birdie who connected the dots. That afternoon, while playing with building blocks that he had bought, she said casually, "The lady with the big briefcase visited the lady in white last night. They were very nervous." "How do you know that?" he asked, dropping the financial reports he was reviewing. "I still go there sometimes," she confessed, lowering her eyes. "I know you said not to go, but I need to make sure Grandma is okay, and I saw them talking in the parking lot." The millionaire felt a mixture of concern and admiration for the child's courage. Even in safety, she continued to risk herself to protect people she didn't even know well. Her determination reminded him of himself in the early years building his investment empire, willing to take any risk to protect what mattered. What were they talking about? The lady with the briefcase was angry. She said you were asking too many questions and that it was going to ruin everything. The lady in white said you wouldn't give up easily because you have a lot of money. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place in the businessman's mind. His stepmother was not just a greedy opportunist. She was the mastermind behind the entire operation. The nurse was just the executor, following instructions from someone who intimately knew the family's financial situation and had legal access to confidential information. That night, he made a decision that would change everything. Using his contacts in the business world, he discreetly hired a private investigator, not to gather legal evidence, but to map the entire network of complicity. If there was a conspiracy to eliminate his mother and inherit the family fortune, he would use every dollar of his resources to expose everyone involved. The investigation revealed a reality even more sinister than he had imagined. The head nurse was not just a corrupt professional. She was part of a small network that had been operating in the hospital for years, identifying elderly patients with wealthy families and systematically accelerating their final situations to profit from inheritances and life insurance. The doctor that Birdie had mentioned was an accomplice, providing official cover for the suspicious situations. There were also pharmacy employees who tampered with medications and lab technicians who falsified tests. All worked under the coordination of his stepmother, who used her knowledge of wealthy families to select targets. During the following month, the businessman meticulously documented every aspect of the operation. His experience analyzing investment funds and detecting financial irregularities proved invaluable in mapping the suspicious money flows. He discovered secret bank accounts, undeclared transfers, and even a fake charity that served as a front for money laundering. But the more evidence he gathered, the more dangerous the situation became. His stepmother had realized she was being investigated and began to accelerate her plans. The threats to use the power of attorney became more frequent and specific, always accompanied by insinuations about accidents that could happen to people who asked too many questions. Birdie, with her extraordinary intuition, was the first to realize the real danger they were in. "They're planning something bad," she said one morning, finding him in the kitchen with eyes red from insomnia. "The lady in white went back to the hospital yesterday, even though she's suspended. And she wasn't alone." The businessman looked out the window of the apartment, observing the normal movement of the street, but feeling that his controlled life was about to turn into something completely unpredictable. His fortune in dollars and stocks, which had always been his greatest security, now seemed insufficient against enemies who operated in the shadows of the healthcare system. That afternoon, he received a call that confirmed his worst fears. The hospital reported that his mother had suffered an unexpected complication during the night and needed to be urgently transferred to intensive care. When he arrived there, he found his stepmother already present, carrying legal documents and talking animatedly with the chief of medicine about difficult decisions that would need to be made. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.